Hey guys, tonight we step into the hushed corridors of Sicilian alleys where the cobblestones remember more blood than rain and where a boy once listened to whispers louder than sermons. Picture it, Palermo in the 1930s. Laundry sways between windows like surrender flags. Old men mutter over espresso, and children play beside doors that never open unless someone's been vouched for. It's the kind of place where the shadows seem to have names, and sometimes they even know yours. Our story begins with a boy named Tommaso. The world would come to know him as the first real traitor of Cosa Nostra, but tonight, he's just a curious kid darting between butchers, bakers, and men who don't blink often enough. You probably won't survive this neighborhood, not unless you know when to speak, when to vanish, and when to nod like you're listening to your last conversation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tommaso Buscetta is born in 1928 in Palermo, at a time when Mussolini's grip on Italy has tightened, but Sicily is still very much its own silent kingdom. He's the youngest of 17 children. 17. That's not a family. It's a soccer league with backup goalies. His father, a glassmaker, works hard and drinks harder, and little Tommaso quickly learns that the world divides itself neatly. Those who speak and those who survive. The house is loud with hunger. Not the metaphorical kind, actual growling stomachs and skipped dinners. And when food does appear, it's from mysterious sources. A chicken one week, a roll of liar the next. No one asks questions, and no one says thank you. The streets raise Tommaso faster than school books do. By age 10, he knows how to pass messages no adult should see. He watches men disappear into corner cafes and re-emerge different, calmer or colder, or not at all. In Palermo's ancient maze of stone, power hums not from elected office, but from a nod, a favor returned. And the first time Tommaso sees a man kneel, not to pray, but to beg, he doesn't flinch. He watches. By 13, he's smuggling cigarettes. Not for profit at first, just for approval. The older boys let him tag along if he carries things. And in a neighborhood like his, being ignored is worse than being hit. One man, an aging mafioso named Don Calogero, spots the sharp glint in Tommaso's quietness. Not the loud kids, not the brash ones. No, it's the still ones that live longest. Tommaso starts spending time in Don Calogero's barbershop. There's nothing particularly clean about the place, except how surgically people vanish after a whispered conversation. The Don teaches him about discretion, not through lectures, through glances. A man's tongue, he says once, trimming Tommaso's hair with careful snips, is like a trigger. Once it moves, something dies. He absorbs it all. Palermo, for him, is both classroom and church. The street becomes scripture, and the older he gets, the more he realizes that Cosa Nostra isn't a myth. It's the town's quiet weather system. It hovers, invisible, yet everyone adjusts their coats accordingly. Mainstream historians agree that post-war Sicily saw a surge in organized crime, filling the vacuum left by fascism's collapse. Many families returned from the war to find local gangs had already divided up neighborhoods like birthday cake. Tommaso, just a teenager, wasn't looking for cake. He was looking for a knife. Still, there's debate among scholars whether he joined out of desperation or attraction. Some say he was a product of hunger. Others argue he felt chosen, tapped by a world more elegant than poverty. many people still think that, had his family owned even a bit of land or luck, he might have become a tailor or teacher. So what do you think? Does survival justify silence if silence keeps you alive? By his late teens, Buscetta is wearing fine suits, cheap ones, but pressed and clean. He smells of aftershave and ash. He speaks less and listens more. He knows how to light someone's cigarette with just enough reverence to earn trust. He's not made yet, not inducted into the Mafia, but he is, without question, orbiting its sun, and Palermo, in return, seems to bend slightly around him. Street vendors nod. Policemen glance, but don't linger. He walks with the confidence of someone who's been told secrets that others only fear. But he's still a boy. Just a boy. And no one tells boys that kingdoms built on whispers eventually come crashing down in screams. The smell of sea salt clings to the rooftops as Tommaso lies awake some nights, listening to dogs bark at nothing, and footsteps that don't always echo twice. Somewhere between those sleepless hours and sunrise, a man is born. Tommaso doesn't so much step into the underworld as drift toward it, pulled not by ambition, but by inevitability. The year is 1945, and while Europe licks its wounds from a war that shattered maps and men alike, Sicily is experiencing its own quiet reckoning. American troops have left their fingerprints everywhere. Jeeps, chewing gum, jazz records. But what they really leave behind is chaos. And where there's chaos, someone will always offer order for a price. Tommaso, barely 17, already walks with a stillness that unnerves people older than his father. It's not that he's cold, it's that he's observant. The kind of young man who watches the tension in a handshake more than the greeting itself. And in a post-war Palermo trying to rebuild itself, such observation is currency. He begins running errands for men who don't look like gangsters, well-groomed, quietly dressed, always 2 steps behind any conversation but 5 steps ahead in understanding. He delivers envelopes, sometimes boxes. He doesn't ask what's inside, and no one offers. That's the first rule. Curiosity is a slow death. One afternoon, he's handed a thick envelope and told to take it across town. Quick, quiet, no stops. He nods. On the way, he passes a group of kids his age playing soccer in a dusty square. For a flicker of a moment, he almost stops. Almost. But the weight of that envelope feels heavier than paper. It feels like gravity. That envelope buys him entry, not into a club or organization, but into a deeper kind of silence. A silence that earns respect. His name starts being whispered in back rooms, always prefaced with, "That boy's reliable." In this world, that's better than smart or strong. It means you're useful. And usefulness is the only kind of safety that matters. By the age of 19, he's already crossed thresholds most men fear to glance at. Petty thefts escalate. Black market cigarettes. Stolen ration cards. One job involves helping offload American surplus goods that fell off a truck. Another time, he's asked to simply sit in a car, engine running, outside a cafe. The man who goes in never comes back out. Tommaso doesn't flinch. Historians agree that the immediate post-war years in Sicily saw Cosa Nostra evolve rapidly, from loose criminal networks into something resembling a shadow government. With the Allies focusing on the mainland, the Mafia filled the power vacuum in the south. They supplied food, enforced justice, and, more than anything, ensured that money moved in the direction they liked. It's around this time Tommaso earns his first taste of real blood. Not his, of course. Someone else's. He doesn't wield the knife, not this time. But he delivers the message that leads to it. And when he sees the news report later, with a photo of the dead man sprawled outside a warehouse, he studies the scene with a curiosity more clinical than emotional. His father disapproves of his late nights and tailored suits. They argue once, only once, and after that, his father simply stops speaking about it altogether. Tommaso's mother keeps cooking for 17, even though only 4 children still live in the house. She doesn't ask where the money comes from. She never will. There's a story, maybe true, maybe myth, about how Tommaso got his first real favor from a capodicina. He was walking home one night when he saw a street dog limping from a shattered bottle. A group of boys were laughing, tossing rocks at it. Tommaso said nothing, just walked up, took one of the rocks, and hit the loudest boy square in the mouth. The others scattered. The next day, the capodicina sent him a coat. Not just any coat, a handmade one, lined in silk, stitched with initials he didn't recognize. No note, no words, just the coat. And from that day on, Tommaso never touched another rock. The streets begin treating him differently. Old men tip their hats. Younger men step aside. Women smile, sometimes nervously. He's still not a made man, but he's something rarer. A man whose path is being cleared for him. Not by chance, by design. And yet, the boy inside him is still there, somewhere. On quiet nights, he listens to the radio, tuning in to distant stations broadcasting in French or English, languages he doesn't understand but loves the rhythm of. Music is still one of the few things that hasn't lied to him. Many people still think that, during this stage, Tommaso had a choice, that he could have left, taken a different path, maybe become a legitimate businessman. After all, he wasn't stupid, and he wasn't broke anymore. But here's the truth, whispered in back rooms, and never written down. By the time you're useful to the mafia, you're no longer free. So what do you think? Does a man choose the life? Or does the life simply choose who can't afford to say no? By 1950, Tommaso has moved into small-time racketeering. He oversees street vendors who pay him to keep their stands safe. He controls who gets to sell bread on what corner, who gets harassed by whom, and which bakeries mysteriously lose power during rush hour. Everything is quiet, efficient, and all of it flows through him like smoke through a chimney. Out of sight, but still staining the sky. There's a moment, not long before his 22nd birthday, when he passes a priest on the street. The man stops him, eyes sharp, and says, "You could have been a doctor, you know." Tommaso smiles, soft and polite. "I don't like blood," he replies, and walks on. By his early 20s, Tommaso Buscetta isn't just known, he's remembered. In a city where men vanish like cigarette smoke, that's both a compliment and a threat. He's still not made, not yet, but his name carries the weight of someone who could be. Palermo watches him the way an aging boxer watches a younger rival, grudging respect, tinged with fear. But it's the barbershop that becomes his true crucible. To outsiders, it's just a humble shop tucked between a bakery and a shuttered tailor. The linoleum curls at the edges, the mirrors are a touch too foggy, and the chairs squeak when you sit. But inside, under the drone of razors and the scrape of straight blades, secrets travel faster than gossip. The chairs don't just face mirrors, they face men playing both sides of the law. And Tommaso, who starts out sweeping hair, soon finds himself learning how to cut deeper without ever using a blade. He trains as a barber under a wiry old man named Carlo, who teaches him how to hold a customer's head in one hand and a razor in the other, like cradling both trust and threat. "It's not about shaving them," Carlo mutters one afternoon, shaping sideburns that no longer grow. "It's about making sure they never flinch." Tommaso learns fast. Clients speak more when they're under a towel. He memorizes patterns: who tips in silence, who chuckles nervously, who asks too many questions. The regulars include bookies, street-level pushers, and once, even a city councilman whose cologne smells like bribes and aftershave. They never call it Cosa Nostra. They just call it our thing, a phrase that's equal parts family and threat. Historians often note that the barber shop, like the bakery or the church pew, was one of Sicily's unofficial safe zones. It was neutral ground, a place where bloodshed paused and information flowed like lather. Many believe this is where Tommaso first became truly valuable, not as muscle or messenger, but as a node, a point where power touched down before flying elsewhere. And then, of course, came the real initiation. It's never officially confirmed. The Mafia doesn't send out welcome letters, but people in Palermo remember the change. One day, he's cutting hair. The next, he's driving a gleaming Fiat, wearing a jacket with imported buttons, and smoking cigarettes that don't come from ration lines. There's a ring on his finger now, small but heavy. He doesn't flash it. He just lets it clink against his espresso cup. They say the ceremony takes place in a candlelit cellar, with fingers pricked and oaths muttered over a burning saint's card. "If I betray," the words go, "may my flesh burn like this." But even Tommaso would later suggest that such rituals were more symbolic than sacred. "The real blood isn't drawn that night," he once muttered in a half-sober interview decades later. "It's drawn over years." So what do you think? Do oaths whispered in the dark carry more weight than laws signed in daylight? Around this time, Tommaso becomes known for something rarer than violence: his manners. He's respectful, calm, and listens with the patience of a saint and the memory of a ledger. Rivals describe him as elegant. Friends describe him as untouchable. He knows when to speak, when to wait, and most importantly, when to vanish from a room without leaving a trace of tension. There's a small story from 1952. He's cutting a man's hair, a mid-level smuggler named Pietro. Pietro starts talking too loudly about a shipment that didn't go to plan. Names are mentioned. So are dates. Tommaso gently lowers the razor, wipes the blade, and says, "Your scalp is thin today. Maybe let's stop here." Pietro laughs awkwardly. 2 weeks later, Pietro moves to Genoa. Nobody knows if it was voluntary. Tommaso begins managing import deals. Not officially, not on paper. But he knows which crates get held at customs and which sail through like saints. The ports of Palermo and Naples become his true kingdom, lined with containers that could carry anything from coffee to heroin. And it's here he learns that crime, like haircuts, is mostly about angles. You can cut straight, or you can cut clever. And Tommaso, he always cuts clever. Still, Palermo remains dangerous. Factions within the Mafia are beginning to shift. There are whispers of heroin, of international routes involving France, Turkey, and Cuba. Tommaso listens, but never reacts too quickly. He watches the men who shout and posture, then aligns himself with the ones who speak less but earn more. One such man is Gaetano Badalamenti, a rising star within the Sicilian drug routes. Their conversations are quiet, deliberate. One phrase from Gaetano sticks in Tommaso's head for years. "Better to be the man who moves the product than the man who makes the noise. And it's not just advice, it's prophecy. By the late 1950s, Tommaso is splitting his time between Sicily and Naples. He's a courier, a negotiator, a shadow that arrives before a deal and disappears after the cash. And while other mobsters build reputations on violence, he builds his on silence. That, and the sharpest part of his barbering, knowing exactly how close to the skin you can go before someone bleeds. Many people still think that Tommaso's success came from luck, that he just happened to be in the right rooms at the right times. But others argue that luck had nothing to do with it, that Buscetta rose because he knew how to read a room before it needed reading. So, which version do you lean toward? On his 30th birthday, he receives a gift from a man he's only met once. A gold watch with no inscription, no card, no message, just the time ticking away in polished silence. Tommaso wears it only once. Then he tucks it into a box, locks the box, and never opens it again. The Mediterranean smells like rust and oil when you get close enough to the docks, and Tommaso Buscetta knows the scent intimately. It's the perfume of profit. The port of Naples becomes his new canvas, sprawling and chaotic, but with just enough rhythm to be controlled. If Palermo raised him, Naples is where he learns the finer art of disappearance, of making things, people, even whole shipments vanish without a ripple. In the late 1950s, Italy is still reeling from post-war instability, but the ports hum like underground cities. While most eyes are turned inland toward politics, the real traffic moves through the water. Cigarettes, textiles, canned goods. And then, less publicly, morphine base. The kind that can be transformed into heroin with the right contacts and wrong intentions. Tommaso isn't the chemist. He's not the thug. He's the arrangement, the smile across a table, the name that opens doors in 2 countries and closes mouths in 3. He doesn't shout over crates. He gestures, and things move. Quietly, efficiently, he begins using legitimate businesses as front doors. A textile firm here, a shipping company there. Shell companies that, on paper, look more boring than a tax seminar. But behind the bland logos are entire continents of activity. He deals with dock workers, customs officers, even a few ex-fascists turned businessmen who now pretend they were never on the wrong side of history. And Tommaso? He never judges. He just remembers. There's one story, often retold by retired dockhands. A customs agent once flagged a shipment, routine inspection. Tommaso arrived before lunch. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply asked the officer about his son's new scooter, the one he'd seen him riding last Sunday. The shipment cleared within 10 minutes. Sometimes fear shouts, but the kind that lingers, it whispers. By now, Buscetta travels often, between Naples, Palermo, and even Milan. He's got false documents, real ones, and a face that blends into both wedding parties and funeral crowds. His presence in any city means something is either being cleaned up or about to be made messy with precision. Scholars note that the ports of southern Italy during this time were more than transport hubs. They were informal kingdoms ruled by nods, greased palms, and silent partnerships. The government barely held them. The mafia? They owned them. And within those tangled jurisdictions, Tommaso becomes a kind of diplomat. He doesn't need to fire a shot to be feared. He just needs to arrive early and stay until the deal is done. Still, Naples has its risks. Rival groups, some from Calabria, some backed by American interests, start sniffing around the docks. One night, a man named Ferraro, known for flipping loyalties, disappears after a meeting with Buscetta. His car is found 2 days later, parked neatly with a cold espresso on the dashboard. No blood, no sign of struggle, but no Ferraro. Did Tommaso do it? Many think not. They say he just made a call. But that's the thing. He rarely needs to get his hands dirty. He simply remembers which favors haven't been called in yet. In 1960, he purchases a small but luxurious apartment overlooking the Bay of Naples. It's furnished with clean lines, polished tile, and just enough religious iconography to suggest guilt, not confession. He rarely sleeps there. Mostly, it's for meetings. And for the occasional woman who doesn't ask too many questions, and about women. He is, by most accounts, a devoted lover, but a distant husband. He marries twice, but he's always married more deeply to silence than to any vow. His children don't always understand him. His wives understand him too well. Still, in every city he touches, he leaves a trail of people who owe him, not out of fear, but out of the quiet debt born from being spared, protected, or remembered when others weren't. He builds a reputation not just as a mafioso, but as something more refined, a gentleman of crime. And that's rare. Mainstream accounts agree that it's around this time Tommaso's influence begins stretching beyond Italy. There are quiet meetings in Marseille, business cards exchanged in Caracas, and phone calls that begin with static and end with ship routes. He partners briefly with American contacts, men with nicknames like Red Joe and Skinny Tommy. They respect him, not because he's flashy, but because he's consistent. There's a memorable incident in Genoa. A minor deal goes south. One of Tommaso's associates gets greedy, tries to reroute a shipment of high-quality morphine through alternate channels. Tommaso doesn't flinch. He schedules a meeting. When the associate arrives, 2 other men are already seated. Tommaso listens. Then he simply stands, says, "You were never one of mine," and leaves. The man is found weeks later on a boat to Tunisia, alive, but missing 3 fingers and all his credibility. Many people still think that Tommaso's calm demeanor was a facade, that under the quiet exterior lurked a brute like any other mobster. But others argue that it wasn't a mask. It was a strategy. He didn't need to intimidate. He simply knew the architecture of fear and walked its hallways like a curator. So, what's more dangerous? A man with a gun, or a man who never needs one? Back in Naples, he continues consolidating power. His network now includes suppliers, transporters, even men in pinstripes who sit on banking boards. He's no longer just a connector. He's a conduit, and he knows it. One evening, while walking along the harbor with a visiting associate from Spain, the man asks him, "Why do you never look worried?" Tommaso stops, looks out at the water, and says, "Because I always know who's rowing the boat." And then he smiles, just slightly. The wind changes in Palermo when blood touches the cobblestones again. Not the kind that trickles from back alley disputes, but the kind that signals new rivalries, fresh vendettas. For Tommaso, it begins quietly. A friend goes silent. A cousin declines a dinner invitation. Then a name is scratched from a wedding guest list. These are the preludes to war in the Mafia. Small absences that echo louder than gunshots. It's 1962, and Buscetta returns to Sicily under the pretense of a family visit. But everyone knows better. He arrives in a pressed linen suit, sunglasses that reflect everything but reveal nothing, and a posture that suggests he hasn't come home. He's come to audit the silence. In truth, Tommaso has outgrown Palermo. His work in Naples and beyond has elevated him to a higher orbit. where dealings aren't just local, they're continental. But Sicily always pulls you back, like gravity or guilt. Cosa Nostra is shifting. The drug trade, once a whispered side hustle, is now a booming undercurrent. And with it comes paranoia. The old school bosses, who prefer honor and handshake deals, are starting to fade. Younger, hungrier men are rising, and their loyalty lies less in blood and more in profit margins. Tommaso senses it quickly. The air at sit-downs is different, more clipped, less ceremonial. There's a chill even in warm rooms. And during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, a fellow mafioso clinks his wine glass just a little too hard and says, "Funny how people forget who brought them their first suitcase of cash." No one laughs. There's a funeral the next morning. Someone's nephew. Car bomb. No one claims it, but everyone knows. And Tommaso? He notices who cries too much and who doesn't at all. He meets with Salvatore Totò Riina for the first time that summer. Riina is short, broad-faced, and rarely blinks. Unlike Tommaso's diplomatic finesse, Riina is all quiet menace. He speaks as if every sentence could be your last instruction. The two men are polite, even cordial. But behind their shared espresso is the unspoken understanding. They are different animals entirely. Historians frequently point to this period as the beginning of a power realignment within the Sicilian Mafia. Riina, along with the Corleonesi faction, would later usher in an era of unprecedented violence. Buscetta, on the other hand, represents the older guard, subtle, transactional, and favor-based. Their coexistence, while momentarily functional, was never destined to last. Still, Tommaso remains too valuable to disregard. He controls shipping routes, has reliable American contacts, and knows the architecture of European smuggling better than most know their own kitchen. So, for now, the friction is papered over with polite handshakes and wine, but something shifts in him during this visit. Maybe it's the realization that Palermo no longer hums the way it used to. Maybe it's the mounting paranoia in his colleagues' eyes. Or maybe it's the fact that, for the first time in years, he's not entirely sure where the bullets will come from next. And then the first farewell comes. One of his close associates, Enzo, a man who once pulled him from a dockside ambush, gets found in a burned-out car outside Termini Imerese. No warning, no feud, just gone. The message is clear. No one's safe just because they once were. Tommaso doesn't flinch, but he adjusts. He stops taking long walks, moves hotels mid-stay, hires a new driver, one whose loyalty he tests 3 times before trusting with a full address. And his wife, noticing the change, asks him softly one night, "Should we leave again?" He doesn't answer. Many people still think this is when Buscetta could have walked away. With his wealth, his international ties, his reputation, he could have vanished into South America and never looked back. But others argue the opposite, that by this point, he was already too embedded, too responsible for too many moving parts. So what do you think? Can a man walk away from a web he helped weave? In a rare moment of openness, he visits his old barber mentor, Carlo. The man is frail now, mostly blind, still holding court in a backroom shop no one seems to find unless they already know the way. Tommaso lets him trim his hair in silence. Afterward, Carlo taps his hand and mutters, "You were always good with the blade, but better with the silence." Tommaso nods. It's the closest thing to a benediction he'll ever receive. Then, one evening, he walks the edge of Palermo's coastline alone, jacket slung over one shoulder, cigarette smoldering between his lips. A couple strolls past him, arm in arm, laughing about something so ordinary he envies them for a second. And in that moment, he decides not to stay, not to leave, but to move, because in the Mafia, stillness is a target. But movement? That's strategy. By 1963, Tommaso Buscetta is gone from Sicily again, this time not in retreat, but in recalibration. He slips out through Naples under a false name, boarding a plane bound for Brazil. The move is surgical, quiet, almost unnoticeable to those not paying close attention. But for the few who are, his absence is deafening. Palermo, for now, has lost one of its most polished sons. Brazil isn't just an escape, it's an opportunity. South America, with its wide ports and thinly policed customs, is the perfect canvas for someone like Buscetta. He touches down in Rio de Janeiro with two things: a suitcase that knows too much, and a mind that already speaks the language of ports, permits, and invisible ink. To the outside world, he's just another Italian expatriate with slicked back hair and a fondness for double espresso. But within months, Tommaso is rebuilding. He marries again. His second wife, Christina, is younger, radiant, and carefully unaware of the full weight of the man she's joined. They have children, a modest home, a garden. He plays the role of businessman well, attending barbecues, shaking hands, speaking enough Portuguese to charm, but not enough to incriminate. But beneath the warmth of Rio's sunsets, he's already opening new doors. The ports of Santos and Recife become familiar terrain. Shipments move from Europe to Brazil, then across the Atlantic in routes so circuitous that even customs officials get dizzy trying to track them. Wine, olive oil, canned goods, all wrapped in legitimacy. But tucked deep in those containers, between false panels and hollow crates, are packages far less wholesome. Morphine base, refined heroin, sometimes weapons. He builds a crew, small, tight-lipped, and mostly Brazilian. They handle logistics, delivery, and the kind of loyalty management that doesn't get logged on time cards. What sets him apart is his balance. He's not greedy. He doesn't overreach. And in Rio's growing underworld, where flashy crime lords fall as fast as they rise, that restraint is both rare and respected. Historians note that during this time, international drug trafficking entered a new phase, less reliant on brute force and more on global logistics. The Mafia's reach extended far beyond Sicily, and figures like Buscetta were instrumental in transforming the organization into a multinational criminal enterprise. He wasn't just part of it, he was designing it. And yet, his time in Brazil isn't just business. There's something about the air there, the music, the ocean, the anonymity that allows a version of Tommaso to surface that Italy never permitted. He starts painting, of all things, small canvases, mostly still life, sometimes abstract, nothing remarkable. But it's the act of painting that seems to matter, a ritual, a kind of therapy. In one of the few interviews he later gives, he mentions it offhandedly. I needed to make something that didn't vanish when someone talked too much. But Rio is not without risk. By the late 60s, word spreads back in Sicily that Buscetta's enjoying himself too much, living too publicly, smiling in too many photographs. Some interpret it as arrogance, others as betrayal. The Mafia, even halfway across the world, has a long memory and a short temper. Tommaso notices the signs. A man he once trusted stops returning calls. A letter from Palermo arrives late and looks like it's been opened. He starts sending his children to school with a driver, one he's vetted 3 times. And one night, while having dinner in a quiet restaurant in Ipanema, a stranger lingers just a little too long at the bar. No confrontation, no violence, but the message is delivered. We see you. So what do you think? Is distance enough to break the gravitational pull of a life once chosen? Or does it simply delay the orbit's return? Still, Buscetta adapts. He shifts addresses, changes suppliers, begins routing some business through Argentina just to confuse the pattern. He never panics. He pivots. That's his true talent. He doesn't rely on brute strength. He relies on foresight and a little paranoia. At home, he's a father. His children know him as calm, affectionate, sometimes absent. He tells them stories in Italian and Portuguese. Some are fairy tales. Others are cleaned-up versions of his past. Morality tales with convenient endings. He never shouts, never raises a hand. But when he's quiet for too long, the room adjusts around him like it's waiting for permission to exhale. There's a beach he loves south of the city, secluded, windy. He visits often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Christina. He doesn't swim much. He just walks the edge of the water, shoes in hand, watching the horizon like it's hiding something. And maybe it is. Many people still think Buscetta's years in Brazil were his happiest. That, for a time, he truly believed he could lead a dual life, half underworld, half domestic peace. But others argue he never stopped looking over his shoulder, that even on the most beautiful days, he was measuring exit routes in his head. So, was it freedom? Or just another prison with softer walls? One afternoon in 1970, he receives a phone call. The voice on the other end is low, familiar, and delivers just a name. No context. Just a name. Tommaso hangs up the phone, kisses his wife, and leaves for the port. 3 days later, a man is missing from Sao Paulo. No investigation, no body. Tommaso returns home, paints a still life of an empty fruit bowl, and doesn't speak about it again. Tommaso Buscetta knows better than to confuse peace with permanence. The 1970s roll in with flare pants and Cold War diplomacy, but under the surface, the heroin trade is heating up like never before. The so-called French connection has begun to fracture, and Sicily is more than ready to become the new global transit hub. The triangular route, Turkey to Sicily to the US, is being carved by men in suits, not just with switchblades, and Tommaso is right in the middle of it. Still, between shipments, meetings, and coded telegrams, he tries to play the family man. It's not an act. He truly loves his children. He just doesn't quite know how to explain the job. One of his sons asks, "What do you do, Papa?" And he answers, without blinking, "I solve problems that come by boat." Not untrue, if you think about it. Back in Sicily, the tectonic plates of the Mafia are shifting. The Corleonesi, led by Riina and Provenzano, are consolidating power in the most brutal way imaginable. While Buscetta is coordinating high-level trafficking from Brazil, the old values of Cosa Nostra, moderation, mediation, family first, are being gutted with bullets. He starts getting letters, long ones, from Palermo. Some warm, some cool, a few unreadable between the lines. A close friend warns him. Things are changing, fast, and not in the way you'd like. Another simply signs off with, "Don't send your sons back here." Tommaso listens. But it's hard to feel urgency from across an ocean. Even harder when you're holding your youngest child on your lap, brushing sand from their hair, while the Brazilian sun makes the world feel like it might just stay golden forever. Still, he sends more money home. opens new accounts, invests in property that no one will ever live in. All of it quiet, all of it clean, or clean enough. But he knows the tide is turning when one of his Brazilian associates is killed. Publicly. A nightclub hit, sloppy. No connection to Tommaso directly, but the message is undeniable. Someone is flexing their reach. Then comes the fracture within his own home. Christina, who once turned a blind eye to his late-night phone calls and unusual travel, starts to ask firmer questions. She's not stupid. She sees the bodyguards, the unlisted numbers, the way the children's school enrollment changes every other year. One night she asks, "Do you think you'll ever stop?" And Tommaso, tired and more honest than usual, replies, "Yes, but not because I want to." She doesn't leave. But she starts packing a kind of emotional suitcase. The quiet detachment of someone who knows what she signed up for, but never fully read the fine print. Meanwhile, back in Sicily, Riina begins what will later be called La Matanza, the slaughter. Dozens of mafiosi are murdered in an internal purge. Anyone suspected of being too close to the state, or not close enough to Corleone, is eliminated. Men who once toasted weddings together are now planting car bombs for dessert. Tommaso's network, once robust and respected, begins to thin. He gets word that 2 of his cousins have been reassigned, which is mafia speak for either demoted or dismembered. A third disappears entirely. When he reaches out to a contact in Milan for answers, the man hesitates before saying, "Tommaso, it's not your world anymore. Not the one you built?" That sentence sticks with him for days. Many people still think that Buscetta began planning his exit from the mafia around this time, that the seeds of betrayal were planted not in fear, but in disappointment. Others argue he remained loyal, simply cautious, until betrayal became his only option. So, what do you think? Does a man ever really betray a family that already betrayed him? Around 1975, his eldest sons, from his first marriage, ask to return to Italy. They say they miss their cousins, their language, their roots. Tommaso hesitates. The warning letters still echo in his ears. But the boys are insistent, and young men with Sicilian pride don't respond well to being told they're too valuable to risk. So he allows it. Reluctantly, he sends money, checks in, hires someone to watch them discreetly. Then silence. Weeks pass, no calls returned, no letters. Then one day, a message arrives. 2 names, 2 dates, no details. Tommaso stares at the slip of paper like it's in another language. He doesn't scream. He doesn't cry. He simply folds the note, places it under his watch strap, and goes outside to smoke. He doesn't say a word about it for days, not even to Christina. Historians agree that the murders of Buscetta's sons marked a fundamental turning point, not just in his life, but in mafia history. It was a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Even in a world built on blood, some cuts are too deep to clot. There's a quote from a retired carabinieri officer. When the mafia killed his sons, they didn't just create a father without children. They created a witness with nothing left to lose. And still, Tommaso waits, bides his time, watches from his home in Brazil as Sicily becomes a map of funerals and revenge. He doesn't retaliate, not yet. Instead, he disappears even further into the folds of Rio, reducing his circle, cleaning his business, preparing something. His associates think he's mourning, but he's calculating. A painting appears in his study not long after. Unlike his usual still lifes, this one is stark. Just 2 empty chairs facing the sea. No signatures, just silence. Palermo is on fire, metaphorically, and sometimes quite literally. By 1980, what remains of the old mafia code has been buried beneath the rubble of bombed cars and unspoken funerals. Totò Riina and the Corleonesi have turned Cosa Nostra into a machine of paranoia and slaughter. Entire families are erased on suspicion alone. And while Sicily bleeds, Tommaso Buscetta, half a world away, stares out the windows of a quiet house in Rio de Janeiro, the ghosts of his sons moving through every room. He's not idle, but he is watching. His Brazilian operation still runs with quiet precision, but the passion for empire is gone. What remains is calculation, habit, and an ever-growing list of names he no longer trusts. Then comes the confirmation. One night, his man in São Paulo, someone he's known for over a decade, calls, shaken. A low-level Sicilian associate had shown up, out of nowhere, asking questions, looking for patterns. "They're mapping you," the voice says. "They want to know your roots, your partners, your exit doors." Tommaso exhales slowly. He's not surprised. The Corleonesi are stretching their fingers across oceans now. Anyone not explicitly with them is, by default, a threat. And Buscetta? He's too old school, too careful, too connected. That's when he starts pulling away, methodically. He closes accounts, moves operations further inland, liquidates assets under fake names. He doesn't run. Not yet. He untangles, but even as he does, another tragedy lands like a punch below the ribs. A second son, killed in Palermo. Different mother, same cruelty. No trial, no reason. Just a body, found slumped in a car, a rosary in one hand, and a bullet in the neck. Tommaso doesn't speak for 2 days after the news reaches him. When he finally does, it's just 4 words, spoken to no one in particular. They've chosen this ending. Many people still believe it was at this moment, after the third son's murder, that Tommaso began plotting something unthinkable for a man of his position. Others argue it was already inevitable, that the betrayals had stacked too high for the foundation to hold. So, what breaks first in a man like that? His code? Or his heart? By now, even his Brazilian operation feels unsafe. Strangers linger too long. A man with a Sicilian accent tries to rent an apartment 2 buildings over. His trusted driver narrowly escapes a staged accident. Tommaso, who has built his life on reading patterns, sees the math. He's being closed in. Then in 1983, the noose tightens. Brazilian authorities, cooperating with Italian and U.S. law enforcement, move in. Tommaso is arrested at his home. No gunfight, no dramatic standoff. Just 3 officers, a knock at the door, and the soft sound of handcuffs clicking shut. He says nothing as they take him away, but inside, a calculation is finishing. He is no longer a man with leverage. He is a target with an expiration date. The Corleonesi want him gone. The government wants him caged. And the men he once trusted? They're either dead or pretending they never knew his name. In custody, the offers come quickly. Extradition. Confession. Protection, maybe, if he talks. He listens politely. Declines. Not yet. And yet, he's thinking, weighing. The arrest is front-page news in Palermo. Il boss di due mondi. The boss of 2 worlds, caught in Brazil, perhaps facing life in Italy. Riina reads the headline with satisfaction. The old school is being dismantled, one arrest at a time. But Buscetta isn't done. He's moved to a holding facility in Rio, while extradition proceedings begin. The cells are clean, The food is passable. But every noise at night makes him flinch in the dark. Not because of prison, but because he doesn't know which guard might be paid off. One evening, a Brazilian officer smuggles in a message. No names, just a time, a location, and a promise. You'll never make it to court. The implication is clear. Someone from Palermo has arranged for his silence to be permanent. That's when the final door inside him creaks open. It's not vengeance. Not exactly. It's clarity. Tommaso begins drafting letters. Short ones. He makes a list. People he trusts, barely. Places he can go, possibly. Then finally, he asks to speak with Italian authorities. The request is simple. I'll talk, but I want Judge Falcone. This is the move that will shake Cosa Nostra to its bones. But no one knows it yet. In that small Brazilian cell, under flickering lights and with the humid air clinging to his skin, Tommaso begins planning something colder than betrayal. He begins planning to speak. Giovanni Falcone is not just a judge. He's a shift in the weather. In Italy, where mafia cases often gather dust or vanish into technicalities, Falcone is a thunderclap in a silent room. Methodical, unshakable, and fluent in the language of fear, he becomes the unlikely recipient of a whispered request from thousands of miles away. Buscetta wants to talk, but only to you. The news reaches Falcone in the summer of 1984. At first, he's skeptical. Men like Tommaso Buscetta don't flip. They disappear, or die, or vanish into rumors. But flip? Never. And yet, here it is. A genuine offer. Quiet, specific, conditioned on trust. Back in Brazil, Tommaso waits. Not patiently, but with a stillness that disguises urgency. He knows he won't survive another month if left in limbo. The Corleonesi have long arms, and Brazilian prisons aren't immune to accidents. Every rustling bedsheet could be a blade. Every laugh in the hallway could be rehearsed. So when the Italian authorities finally arrange extradition, with guarantees of safety and a chance to speak under protection, Tommaso boards the flight like a man walking across ice. He knows what this means. Not just survival, not just betrayal, but transformation. He's no longer a man of Cosa Nostra. He's now a weapon aimed directly at its throat. Historians still debate whether this moment was planned well in advance or made in desperation. Many believe Buscetta had been preparing to flip for years. Others argue it was the grief, stacked corpses where sons should have stood, that made him cross the line. So, what do you think? Was it strategy or heartbreak that finally turned him? Falcone meets him in a secure facility near Rome. No press, no leaks. Just two men, a quiet room, and the weight of decades between them. Tommaso doesn't start with names. He starts with structure. The mafia, he says, is not what the movies show. It's not just men with guns or secret handshakes. It's a system, like a government, like a business, and no one really understands it, not even the police. Falcone listens, nods, takes notes. No interruptions, no disbelief. Over days, then weeks, Buscetta lays out the bones and blood of Cosa Nostra, the hierarchy, the territories, the commission, how decisions are made, how votes are cast, how men disappear not because of rage, but because of boardroom etiquette gone sour. He doesn't just give names, he gives logic, a roadmap to the mafia's inner software. It's the first time Italian law enforcement hears the phrase Cosa Nostra defined as more than just folklore. Buscetta explains the concept of omertà, the sacred silence, and then, with a calmness that unnerves even seasoned agents, he says, I broke it the moment they broke my family. This isn't revenge, this is record-keeping. He names Riina, Provenzano, Greco, badalamenti, politicians, bankers, even priests who looked the other way. His memory is a vault, his testimony gold dust. By the third week, he's moved to an undisclosed location. Falcone insists on full protection, armored transport, rotated guards, secure meals. Tommaso, always composed, quietly requests only two things: decent coffee and a radio. Something to remind him the world still turns beyond bulletproof glass. Word begins to leak. Journalists catch wind of a high-level informant. Un pentito, they call him. A repentant one. The mafia circles buzz like hornets. Riina reportedly flies into a rage, ordering the creation of new cleaners, tasked solely with tracking Buscetta's movements. But it's too late. The seed has been planted. The silence is broken. Falcone and his team compile Buscetta's testimony into what will become the backbone of the Maxi trial, the largest anti-mafia prosecution in Italian history. Hundreds of pages, dozens of hours, one voice, calm, measured, devastating. Tommaso doesn't gloat. He doesn't boast. In fact, when one officer asks him, "Do you feel like a hero now?" he simply replies, "I feel like a man who buried too many sons." Many people still think Buscetta's motivation was self-preservation. That, faced with death, he chose the only escape route left. But others insist that something deeper was at work, a desire to destroy what had destroyed him. So which version feels more true? The Italian government, for its part, doesn't quite know what to do with him. He's valuable, but radioactive. Loved by prosecutors, hated by police who lost friends in mafia ambushes, resented by the public, revered by lawyers. He becomes a paradox, both the problem and the solution, and yet he continues. One morning, after a long session with Falcone, he remarks, "They'll kill you for this, you know." Falcone looks up, tired, but steady. "Probably," he says, "but we can't let that stop us." Tommaso nods once, that's all. As fall descends on Rome, Buscetta is quietly moved again. A new identity, a new layer of protection. But the story he's begun is no longer his alone. It belongs to the courtrooms now, to the reporters, to the agents with dark bags under their eyes and piles of translated wiretaps, to history, to truth. In the hushed chambers of Palermo's courthouse, the wheels of history begin to groan into motion. January 1986. The Maxi trial opens with 475 defendants, mobsters, capos, hitmen, smugglers, and their polished intermediaries. Seated in steel cages, the accused stare across the marble floor at a room no longer afraid of them. And all of it, this towering spectacle of justice, begins with the words of one man, Tommaso Buscetta. He isn't in the room, of course. His safety requires more distance than that. He testifies via closed circuit from a secure location, flanked by guards who look less like law enforcement and more like soldiers on high alert. And still, he's calm. Not a twitch. Not a single cracked syllable. The man who once dined with dons now lays out, step by step, how those same dons signed each other's death warrants over espresso. His testimony isn't just lengthy, it's architectural. He builds a blueprint of the mafia from the ground up. The cupola, the commission, how disputes are settled, how votes are taken for murder, how blood feuds are paused not by mercy, but by mutual interest. One prosecutor later described it this way: "He didn't just tell us who killed who. He told us how the entire ecosystem breathes. Cages rattle as names are read aloud. Some defendants shout, others smirk. But there's no silencing the stream now. The trial stretches on for months, then years, and through it all, Buscetta remains, quietly, consistently, on the record. For the public, it's surreal. Italy had long suspected the mafia's influence ran deep, but here it is, confirmed in methodical bursts. Politicians with side deals, police captains looking the other way, entire villages whose elections were decided long before the ballots were printed. Still, for Tommaso, the trial is not victory, it's math. He knows that for every conviction, 2 vendettas bloom. For every truth spoken, someone sharpens a blade in the dark. But he keeps going, not out of hope, out of finality. This is the end game. Many people still argue about his motives. Some call him a traitor who saved himself with words instead of bullets. Others see a broken man trying to give meaning to losses he couldn't reverse. So, what do you think? If someone breaks their silence after everything's already been taken from them, does it still count as betrayal? Back in hiding, Tommaso lives like a ghost. Rooms change, identities change. Sometimes even his accent changes, slipping between Sicilian softness and Brazilian drawl, depending on who he needs to be that day. The only constant is his guarded routine. Coffee at 7, news by 8, followed by long stretches of silence where he reads trial transcripts like a man scanning for his own obituary. His family adapts. His wife, Christina, becomes the default voice on the phone when lawyers need signatures or clarifications. His younger children know not to ask about certain years. There's a Christmas where everyone whispers, a birthday where the cake goes untouched. Silence becomes not just protection, but habit, then a ripple. In 1987, the court delivers its first ruling, 344 convictions totaling 2,665 years of prison time. Headlines explode. Rina fumes. Italy exhales. But the mafia does not forget. Soon after, several high-ranking prosecutors begin receiving threats. A judge's car explodes outside his daughter's school. One defendant, jailed and awaiting appeal, is found with his tongue cut out. A message, plain as daylight. Buscetta is moved again, this time to a NATO facility, far from prying eyes. He jokes to one officer that he's becoming less of a person and more of a postal code. Falcone remains his only steady link. Their conversations grow more infrequent, but deeper. They no longer talk only of courtrooms. They speak of legacy, of consequence, of the line between justice and survival. One evening, over weak institutional espresso, Tommaso asks, "Do you think any of this will change them?" Falcone doesn't answer, just stares at the steam curling above his cup, like the future was something he could see but not touch. The mafia, meanwhile, is fracturing. Rina is more powerful than ever, but paranoia rules his circle. Informants multiply, arrests pile up, and still the blood keeps flowing. Judges, journalists, ex-wives, even a priest who refused to bless a funeral linked to drug money. All gone. And Tommaso, watching from afar, begins to feel what can only be called vertigo. The kind of moral spinning that comes when your truth has weight, but no steering wheel. One morning, he receives a package. No return address. Inside, a cassette tape. Old, dusty. He plays it. A recording of a wedding he attended decades ago. Laughter, music, a voice in the background. His own, telling a joke about port inspectors and bridesmaids. He doesn't finish the tape. He ejects it, wraps it in tissue, and locks it in a drawer he'll never open again. Many people still think that, by this point, Buscetta had no regrets, that he accepted his role as necessary. but others suggest that his silences were less about security and more about sorrow. So here's a question worth sleeping on. If a man burns down the house that raised him, is he free or just homeless? As the Maxi trial enters its appeal phase, Tommaso continues to testify. Cross-examinations become sparring matches. Defense attorneys call him a liar, a manipulator, a coward. He listens, then calmly recites dates, times, locations. Check the customs logs, he says once. They do. He's right. He doesn't flinch when lawyers accuse him of orchestrating hits. He doesn't deny it. He simply says, "It was my job." Then it wasn't, and that's the most terrifying part. The Mafia had rules once, and now it has Rina. By 1990, Tommaso Buscetta has become both legend and liability. His testimony has carved a hole in the heart of Cosa Nostra. But legends don't sleep easy, and liabilities rarely grow old. Every time he looks in the mirror, he sees not just an aging man in hiding, but the faint outline of a crosshair. Still, he moves forward, one cautious step at a time. He now lives in the United States, under a new identity. The Witness Protection Program has tucked him away in a suburb that smells of fresh paint and new lawns. He shops at grocery stores where no one knows his name. He eats at diners where the waitresses call everyone Hon. The ordinary anonymity is almost laughable. Except it's the only thing keeping him alive. The American authorities treat him like fine glass, not because they revere him, but because they're terrified he might shatter. His testimony is still active, still rippling through courtrooms on both sides of the Atlantic. A single bullet could erase years of legal momentum. So they wrap him in layers of secrecy, protocol, and the polite paranoia that only government agencies can truly master. But Tommaso is restless. He paints again. Small canvases, landscapes, things that don't bleed. He reads, watches old Italian films. Occasionally, he teaches his youngest children chess, not because he loves the game, but because it rewards foresight, silence, and control. Sound familiar? And yet, something stirs. He begins to feel the walls of protection closing in, not as security, but as suffocation. He's used to being hunted, yes, but he's also used to being relevant, dangerous. And now, behind the white fences and government-approved smiles, he feels more ghost than man. Then in Sicily, the world shifts again. Salvatore Riina is at his peak, controlling vast swaths of territory through intimidation, bribery, and sheer terror. But paranoia rots even the strongest empires. The Corleonesi, in trying to silence dissent, have created cracks in the foundation. More pentiti, informants, begin to come forward, inspired or emboldened by Buscetta's example. And not just soldiers, capos, accountants, even a consigliere. The Mafia's walls aren't just bleeding, they're hemorrhaging. Tommaso watches from afar as Italy slowly, painfully begins to wrestle with its own silence. Politicians fumble through press conferences. Judges start taking armored cars to work. Police officers tape their family photos face down on their desks. The state, for once, is paying attention, and still, Tommaso doesn't celebrate. He knows better. He's seen this movie before, and it always ends with someone not making it to the credits. Then, something unthinkable happens. May 1992, Giovanni Falcone, killed in Capaci, Sicily, a highway explosion. Half a ton of TNT buried beneath the asphalt. His car is obliterated. His wife, his escorts, all gone. The blast is so powerful it registers on seismographs. It is not just murder. It's theater. It's a message written in fire. We're still here. Tommaso's world stills. He doesn't speak for a day. Not to his handlers, not to his wife. He sits in the kitchen, lights a cigarette he hasn't touched in years, and stares at nothing. Falcone was not just his contact. He was, in a strange and complicated way, the only man who had ever fully understood him. Many people still believe this is when Buscetta truly broke. That, until this moment, he held some hope, faint and foolish, that his cooperation would tip the scales. But with Falcone gone, that balance vanishes. So what do you think? Can justice exist in a world where its loudest voice is buried under concrete? A few weeks later, Paolo Borsellino, Falcone's friend and fellow magistrate, is also murdered. Another explosion. Another shattered street. Sicily bleeds again. And this time, there's no pretense. The Mafia is declaring war not just on individuals, but on the very concept of accountability. Tommaso, moved yet again for safety, becomes more isolated than ever. He starts refusing interviews, stops watching the news, paints less, speaks even less than that. And yet, the machine he helped build, the courtroom machinery of truth, keeps moving. The maxi trial appeals hold. Convictions are upheld. Reina begins to feel the net tightening. Buscetta's words, recorded and transcribed years earlier, still echo in courts. Even the men who cursed him with spit-flecked rage now quote his testimony in plea deals. He's not a man anymore. He's precedent. Back in his anonymous home, he walks the neighborhood at night. Hood up, hands deep in coat pockets. Not because anyone's watching, but because it's the only time he feels invisible on his own terms. His wife asks him, sometimes, if he regrets it. Not the testifying, not the betrayal, just the life, the whole structure. And Tommaso always answers the same way. I regret that I believed there were rules. Many people still think that Buscetta's greatest betrayal was against Cosa Nostra. But others argue the Mafia betrayed him first, when it stopped being a system and started becoming a slaughterhouse. So here's a thought. If a man stays loyal to the idea of something, but not its execution, is he disloyal or just disillusioned? The FBI offers him yet another new name, another town, another attempt at peace. He declines. He knows peace isn't a place. It's a forgetting, and he'll never forget. Late one evening, during a quiet moment in a dimly lit room, he says to a visiting official, if Falcone had lived, things might have ended differently. And the official, older, tired, familiar with the sting of maybes, just replies, they always might have. By the mid-1990s, Tommaso Buscetta is something few men in his world ever become. Alive, aging, and still holding secrets. The Mafia may have tried to erase him, but instead, they've created a man who now exists outside the myth. Neither hero nor villain, just a breathing contradiction. He's relocated once again. This time, deeper into American anonymity. A dry town, strip malls, the kind of place where no one asks questions because no one really listens to the answers. His neighbors think he's a retired professor, maybe a quiet widower. Some suspect CIA, but only as a joke shared over lawn clippings. Inside his modest home, everything has a place. The windows are always half-shuttered. The phone rings, but only once. He doesn't answer unless the call comes at a very specific time. Trust is no longer a luxury. It's a filtration system. His youngest children are growing up in a world where their father is both protective and distant. He's the kind of dad who helps with math homework, but never says, I'm proud of you. The love is there, buried, shaped like caution. On birthdays, he offers small gifts, a chessboard, a painting set, once even a set of lock-picking tools, just for the puzzle of it. He says with a shrug. They laugh. He doesn't. Despite his physical safety, Tommaso's mind is a war zone of memory. He writes sometimes, not memoirs, but fragmented thoughts. Phrases like, "The rules were lies we agreed to obey," or "They only respected silence when it suited them." He tears up most pages. A few end up folded into books no one reads. Then comes 1993. After years in hiding, Salvatore Toto Riina is finally captured. In Palermo, crowds cheer as armored police vans carry him away. A man responsible for hundreds of murders, finally in custody. For a moment, Italy breathes. Even Tommaso allows himself a quiet nod when the news reaches him. But it's not joy he feels, it's relief, tempered and temporary. Because for every Riina, there's a Provenzano, a Bagarella, a new shadow waiting to step forward. The mafia isn't a man, it's mold. You scrub the walls, and it still grows back in the cracks, and Tommaso knows this better than anyone. Still, the fall of Riina marks a turning point. Trials accelerate, testimonies stack. Pentiti come forward in numbers that once seemed impossible. And through it all, Buscetta's words, spoken years earlier, remain the cornerstone. Prosecutors call his testimony the spine of the truth. He's invited to give another deposition, this time for an American case involving transatlantic heroin trafficking. He agrees, but insists on full blackout protocols. No press, no exposure, just the facts. During the deposition, an attorney asks, "Do you consider yourself the first man to truly break omertà?" Tommaso considers the question, then replies, "No. I'm just the first who lived long enough to explain it. Many people still debate whether Buscetta's cooperation dismantled the mafia or simply forced it to evolve, that the new generations, born from blood and restructuring, adapted to silence with better lawyers and cleaner accountants. So what do you think? Is it victory if the monster just grows a new face?" He turns 70 in silence. No party, just espresso. He opens a letter from his daughter, handwritten, soft, with a Polaroid tucked inside. A picnic, a cake, a smile he hasn't seen in years. He stares at the photo for a long time, then places it in a drawer beside an old Saints card, slightly burned at the edges. There's another photo in that drawer too. One taken long ago, before the trials, before Brazil, before the world knew his name. He's standing between two men. One would be killed in Palermo. The other would vanish in Venezuela. He's the only one left, and he knows that's not triumph. That's sentence. At night, he dreams of doors, always locked, always leading back to the same place. Sometimes, he sees Falcone. The judge isn't angry, just tired. They sit in silence. And that's the dream. In waking life, Tommaso keeps his world small. His wife does most of the talking when visitors come. He smiles politely, shakes hands firmly, but never too long. He never walks the same route twice in 1 week, and he still checks his rearview mirror at red lights. But there are soft moments too. A grandchild runs up one afternoon, hugs him without warning. He freezes, then kneels, returns the embrace. When the child pulls back, he says, "You don't have to be quiet all the time, Nono." Tommaso just nods, doesn't answer, but later that night, he takes out a blank canvas and paints a field of sunflowers. Many believe that Tommaso Buscetta's greatest legacy is the legal change he triggered, but others argue it's something quieter, the idea that fear, no matter how deeply rooted, can be unlearned. That silence can be broken, not by shouting, but by choosing once to speak when it matters most. He watches the news less now, not because he doesn't care, but because the stories sound too familiar. History always seems to remember his kind only in black and white, but he knows the truth has more colors than that, most of them muted. In his final notebook, nearly full, he writes just one sentence on the last page. "I didn't betray the mafia, I survived it." Tommaso Buscetta no longer measures time in minutes or months. He measures it in silences. How long the phone doesn't ring, how many days pass without someone saying the word mafia near him, how often he wakes up forgetting where he is until the morning light hits a wall he doesn't recognize. By the late 1990s, the world has moved on from headlines with his name in bold. New wars, new scandals, new faces in both politics and crime. But the machine he helped set in motion is still spinning. Prosecutors continue to cite his testimony in fresh cases. His words live on in courtrooms and criminal law textbooks. He is in some ways more relevant than ever, and more alone than he's ever been. He spends most mornings at the same kitchen table, drinking the same weak American coffee, staring out the same narrow window at the same row of hedges. And yet, his mind is rarely still. It jumps to Palermo, to Naples, to Rio, to the sound of a son's laughter that now feels like it belongs to a movie he once watched in another life. Sometimes, just before sleep, he mumbles the old prayers, not because he's devout, but because certain words feel like armor. His health begins to decline. Slowly at first, nothing dramatic, just breath that's harder to catch, stares that feel taller, nights where sleep slips through his fingers like fog. He doesn't complain, but his wife sees the change. She begins organizing his pills with military precision, labels them, times them, pretends this is all normal. One day, he tries to write, just to see if he still can. The pen feels heavier than before. He scribbles a sentence. The quiet kills faster than the gun, then puts the pen down and never picks it up again. Meanwhile, back in Italy, a younger generation of prosecutors, many of whom grew up reading about Buscetta in newspapers, now walk the halls Falcone once walked. They speak his name with the hushed reverence of someone both feared and admired. Some see him as a martyr, others as a necessary evil. But all agree, without him, the map of modern, organized crime would still be drawn in the dark. Rina, once untouchable, now rots in prison. Provenzano, too, will be captured in a farmhouse years later, living like a ghost surrounded by bottled water and outdated prescriptions. Buscetta outlives them both, not with joy, but with the heavy ache of someone who has watched all the wrong people die and all the right ones suffer. Many people still wonder why he was never killed. That Cosa Nostra, famed for its merciless reach, failed to silence him even after decades. Theories abound. Did the Americans protect him too well? Did the mafia fear the myth he had become? Or perhaps, did they understand that his death would make him louder than ever? So what do you think? Does a man like Buscetta become less dangerous when he dies, or more? Occasionally, a journalist tries to track him down. Some get close. One sends a letter through a lawyer, asking for an interview. Tommaso declines with a single sentence. "I've already told the story that matters. The rest is just ash. The only people who see him now are his wife, his children, and his doctor." The visits are brief, the conversations shorter, and yet he's not bitter. If anything, he's exhausted, not just by time, but by memory. When your life is built on secrets, the The hardest part of aging is knowing which ones to take with you and which to leave behind. He walks the garden most afternoons. Slow, deliberate steps. A cane now. Not because he needs it, but because it gives him rhythm. He counts his steps, not like a prisoner, but like someone learning how to be ordinary. Then, one summer evening, he asks for an old Sicilian dish. Something simple. Pasta con le sarde. Christina makes it, just like his mother used to. He takes a bite, closes his eyes, smiles, not because it's delicious, but because for 1 second, it feels like the boy who swept floors in a barbershop still lives somewhere behind the scarred walls of this old man's body. After dinner, he sits outside until the sun disappears. A neighbor passes by walking their dog, nods politely. "Evening," they say. Tommaso nods back. "Quiet night," he replies, and the neighbor, having no idea who they just spoke to, agrees. It's the early 2000s now, and Tommaso Buscetta has grown into the kind of old man people politely ignore. He's thin, slow-moving, careful in posture and tone. At the grocery store, no one suspects that the quiet Italian in aisle 5 once helped dismantle one of the most powerful criminal organizations in modern history. He picks his fruit carefully. He scans the labels. He pays in cash. No one notices his eyes never stop moving. His world has shrunk into rituals. The same walk around the block, the same seat at the window, the same television channel, low volume, not watched but heard. He answers the phone less often now. Most calls are from doctors or lawyers, remnants of a world he once controlled but no longer trusts. His wife keeps the house warm and bland. No family photos, no heirlooms, nothing that invites conversation. The kitchen smells like basil and caution. In the living room, a small box of keepsakes remains hidden behind books no one opens. Inside, an old comb, a faded photo of 2 boys in suits, a dog-eared copy of The Godfather with passages underlined not out of admiration, but correction. The truth is, Tommaso is waiting, not for death. He made peace with that years ago. No, he's waiting for quiet to feel safe again, for a world where he doesn't need to calculate every angle before opening a door. But he's beginning to understand that world may never come, that safety, for him, was always borrowed, and time, just an extended negotiation. In Sicily, the mafia mutates. Less blood, more wire transfers. Less gunfire, more boardrooms. The brutality has evolved into bureaucracy. Tommaso reads about it sometimes, shaking his head, not in disgust, but in recognition. It's the same disease, just with cleaner fingernails. He doesn't follow politics, not anymore. He knows too well how power wears disguises. He watches the news only for the weather. Rain still makes him nervous. It reminds him of backroom deals and bodies found in ditches. One morning, he receives a visit. An Italian journalist, young, polite, eager. The man tracked him down through layers of aliases and bureaucratic fog. He doesn't want an interview, just a handshake. "You're the reason I became a reporter," he says. Tommaso doesn't answer, just studies him, then says, "Don't chase ghosts, son. They're faster than they look." He shuts the door, doesn't open it again for the rest of the day. Many people still think of Buscetta as either hero or traitor, one or the other. But the truth lives somewhere murkier. He was a killer, a father, a patriot in his own crooked way. A man who built a kingdom in the dark, only to burn the blueprint when the fire came too close. So what do you call a man who betrays a code to honor a deeper one? His body begins to fail in small, private ways. His hands tremble when tying shoes. His breath shortens on mild inclines, but he hides it, always has. Pain is nothing compared to memory. Memory is what truly wears the bones. He rarely leaves the house now. The world is too fast, too loud. He reads instead. Old books, paperbacks, occasionally his own court transcripts. Once, while flipping through a volume of his deposition, he laughs softly and says, "I sound like a man trying not to confess and still getting there anyway." Sometimes at night, he hums old Sicilian lullabies under his breath, songs his mother used to sing when she thought no one was listening. He doesn't know why they come back to him. Maybe we return to the sounds that first told us we were safe. His children visit less often, not out of neglect, but distance, geographic, emotional, both. He doesn't blame them. He taught them to survive, not stay. And in his own way, that was love. Then, one quiet Tuesday, his wife finds him asleep in his chair, sunlight pooling on the floor like spilled gold. His breathing is slow, thin, threadbare. When he opens his eyes, he smiles at her, not out of joy, but gratitude. He says only, "You stayed," and then drifts back into the kind of silence that doesn't need guarding. Many people still argue whether Tommaso Buscetta ever truly escaped. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's not about whether he got away. Maybe it's about whether he ever stopped running. The final years of Tommaso Buscetta's life feel less like a conclusion and more like a soft fade out, a gentle dimming of someone who once lived at full volume in whispered rooms. He no longer speaks of Sicily unless prompted, and even then, only in riddles. He has nothing left to prove, and even less left to explain. He spends most mornings watching birds at the feeder just outside his kitchen window. Blue jays, sparrows, occasionally a hawk that never lingers. He studies them with the focus of someone used to assessing threat levels in every movement. Even the birds. There's a quiet routine to his days now. Breakfast before sunrise. Black coffee, never sugar, never cream. He reads the newspaper but skips international news. Too many names. Too many stories he knows the endings to, but no one else does. If someone mentions the word Cosa Nostra in a headline, he folds the page before reading it. That name doesn't belong to him anymore. His wife, Christina, grows more protective as his body weakens. She schedules every appointment, handles all the medicine, speaks to doctors like a diplomat shielding a president. When he jokes, softly, gently, that he should have died back in Brazil, she answers only with a sharp look and silence thick as cement. And still, Tommaso smiles when she walks into the room. Sometimes, one afternoon, he begins writing a letter to his grandchildren. He wants to explain the past, not to justify it, but to contain it. He writes for hours, stops, starts again. By the end of the day, the letter is 10 pages long. The next morning, he burns it. Some truths, he decides, are better inherited through distance. Many people still think that Buscetta went into hiding to avoid justice. Others say he was justice's reluctant messenger. But few consider the weight of surviving something you were once devoted to. Few understand the loneliness of being the last one left who remembers all the details. He dreams often of Palermo. Not the violence, not the betrayals, just the smell of sea salt and baked bread. A childhood corner where a fruit vendor used to hand him figs without charge. The chipped tiles in his mother's kitchen. The color of dusk over Monte Pellegrino. These are the memories that stay, the ones untainted by blood. On his final birthday, his family gathers, discreetly under aliases, in a place without windows facing the street. There's cake, a few candles. His grandson gives him a small stone, painted gold. For protection, the child says, not knowing how ironic that is. Tommaso holds the stone in his palm for a long time, doesn't say a word. That night, as the house quiets, Christina finds him in the study, asleep in his chair. One hand resting on the table, the other still curled around the little gold rock. His breathing is shallow, his features softened. She doesn't wake him. Instead, she draws the curtains, lights a candle, stays nearby. This is where we slow the rhythm. The lights fade. The world steps back. He doesn't pass that night, but something inside him seems to. A loosening, a final inventory being closed and filed away. And when he does die, months later, it's not with headlines or gunfire or revenge. It's in a hospital bed under a false name with only 2 people present, his wife and a nurse who doesn't even know she's witnessing the end of a man who once unraveled a criminal empire with nothing but memory and grief. The obituary is 2 paragraphs long, no mention of the mafia, just a name no one recognizes, survived by a wife and children who never give interviews. That's how the story ends, not with explosions, not with a final betrayal, but with sleep. And so now, listener, we ease into that same stillness. The night settles in. The rooms grow quieter. You're safe here. Let the names blur. Let the history dim. You've traveled far tonight, through shadows and whispers, betrayal and silence, and you've made it to the other side. Close your eyes. Take a breath. The story's over now. Just you. The quiet and the soft hush of a man who finally stopped running. Good night. Tommaso Buscetta's death doesn't ripple outward like most mafia stories do. There are no retaliations, no funerals with helicopters circling overhead, no coded messages left in the corners of newspapers. Instead, there is only a quiet vacancy, an absence so complete it barely registers. His grave is unmarked. Somewhere in the American Southwest, under a name borrowed from a birth certificate that once belonged to a man who never left Kansas. The cemetery is modest, neat. Just another row of trimmed grass and sun-faded flowers. The only people who visit are those who already know, and they never linger. But in Palermo, he's still very much alive. Not in body, of course, but in the way people talk about him when they think no one is listening. In the market stalls, his name floats like a ghost through fish scales and cigarette smoke. He was the one who talked. He was the one who broke the rules. He was the one who told the truth. Too well. The older generation spits his name like something sour. The younger ones say it with something closer to curiosity. Some even say admiration. He is, after all, the man who shattered the myth, the one who proved that omerta had a breaking point, and that it bled like anything else. Back in the courts, his testimony continues to carry weight. Even years after his death, prosecutors still pull lines from his depositions, cross-reference his memory with documents, validate the structure of indictments using words he whispered into tape recorders behind mirrored glass. But something else happens too. The mafia begins to fade. Not vanish, not die, but shift. It moves into white-collar crime, shell companies, waste management contracts, political favors dressed up as zoning permits, fewer bodies in ditches, more men in tailored suits sitting on municipal councils. The code remains, but the wardrobe changes. Many historians still argue over Buscetta's legacy. Was he a hero? A traitor? A man trying to salvage a soul already compromised? His story resists simplification. There's no clean redemption arc here. No third act confession that makes it all okay. So what do you think? Can a man be both architect and arsonist of the same house? There's a documentary made a few years after his death. It features grainy footage, voice actors reading transcripts, and a slow jazz soundtrack that tries too hard to make his life feel cinematic. But no documentary captures the most vital part, the silence between his sentences, the weight of pauses, the things he didn't say. In one clip, a younger Tommaso sits beneath dim lighting, hands folded, and says, "The hardest part is not remembering what you did. It's remembering why you stopped doing it." That quote becomes a meme for a while, gets printed on mugs, posted on true crime forums, detached from its weight, reduced to something aesthetic. Meanwhile, Christina, his widow, lives out her final years in a condo in Florida. Ocean view, 2 dogs. She refuses interviews, doesn't answer fan mail, never once visits Sicily again. In her home office, a photo of Tommaso faces the window. Not him as a young man, but old, tired, staring straight into the lens like he knows something you'll never quite grasp. His children splinter in opposite directions. One becomes a schoolteacher, another works in finance. A third changes their name completely and starts a small cafe somewhere in Arizona. They don't hide their past, but they don't decorate it either. Once a year, quietly, each of them sends money to a legal aid fund for victims of organized crime. No notes, no return address. Some debts get paid differently, and in Sicily, the world keeps spinning. The fish still flop on the marble slabs at Palermo market. The bells still ring over narrow rooftops. Somewhere, a barber still sharpens his blade in the early morning light. And maybe, just maybe, someone walks past a quiet corner and remembers the boy who used to carry messages without ever asking what was inside the envelope. A boy who listened before he spoke, and eventually spoke louder than anyone expected. In the years that follow Buscetta's death, his name becomes less a person and more a precedent. Courtrooms in Palermo, Rome, Naples. His voice still echoes through them, preserved in tapes, transcripts, and tired prosecutors quoting paragraphs that once spilled from his memory like water. The judges refer to him not by his full name anymore, but simply as the first pentito. And with those 2 words, a floodgate remains permanently ajar. It's a strange immortality, the kind built not on statues or monuments, but footnotes and sealed files. Law students study him. Mafia historians debate him. Criminologists dissect him like an abstract formula. Loyalty plus betrayal. Survival. But even outside academia, his story lingers. In a small cafe in Naples, a former smuggler turned dishwasher wipes tables and tells wide-eyed teenagers, "I once poured wine for the man who broke Cosa Nostra." He tells it like folklore. Some believe him, most don't. It doesn't matter. The story gets passed on. In New York, a retired FBI agent keeps a grainy photo of Buscetta on his fridge. His wife doesn't like it. It unnerves her. But the agent says, he was the only one who talked, the only one who told the whole map. Meanwhile, the mafia changes its code again. No more vendettas in broad daylight. No more flaming cars on quiet roads. Now it's banking, pharmaceuticals, crypto, contracts won without bids. The handshake is the same. The scent is the same. Only the accent has changed. But the playbook they use still includes pages Buscetta helped write, still includes sections he memorized before most of his rivals could read. And that's what haunts those who came after. Not just that he spoke, but that he was right. Many people still say he lived in fear after turning informant, but others who knew him closely say no. He lived in ritual, not paranoia, but preparation. He didn't fear death. He feared irrelevance. that his story would be twisted, simplified, filed away with the wrong label. So what do you think? Is survival enough? Or does truth only matter if someone's still around to argue about it? There's a moment, barely recorded, in the final years of his life. A visit from a younger federal agent, nervous, curious, respectful. The agent brings a copy of the original maxi trial findings, all bound up, fresh print, clean cover. He offers it to Buscetta as a gesture. Tommaso opens it, flips through a few pages, then closes it gently and says, "You know what's missing from this book?" The agent blinks. "What?" "The nights I didn't sleep. The faces I can't remember. The names I still regret not saying." He hands the book back, doesn't smile, but something about the exchange stays with the agent for years, and maybe that's the point. Legacy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers in the quiet moments after someone leaves the room. Back in Italy, Falcone's name now belongs to an airport. There's a bust of him near the arrivals terminal. Tourists walk past it, unaware that this marble man once tried to cage a hydra. Buscetta's name, meanwhile, appears only in the footnotes of museum plaques, always with the word pentito beside it. Never visionary, never broken father, never architect of collapse. But some know, the people who matter, they know. Christina dies a few years after him, peacefully, in her sleep. The obituary lists her as a loving wife and mother, remembered for her strength. No mention of the aliases, no mention of the nights she lay awake beside a man who carried the weight of nations in his silences. Their children inherit nothing flashy, no fortunes, no grand property, just a handful of files, some letters, a few old cassette tapes. One of them, out of pure instinct, takes those items and buries them in the backyard of a home they will later sell. No one marks the spot. No one needs to. One spring, a journalist from Palermo tracks down one of the Buscetta grandchildren, wants to know what it was like, growing up in that shadow, carrying that last name, even hidden beneath a new one. The grandchild listens politely, then replies, "I didn't grow up in his shadow. I grew up in his silence, and that's louder than anything he ever said." The interview is never published, but the audio floats around, and late one night, in a quiet university archive in Bologna, a student clicks play, hears that voice, that truth, that weight, and just listens. In the twilight of Buscetta's influence, something odd begins to happen. He becomes a metaphor, not in the flashy way films usually depict mafiosi, but in a quieter, more academic form. Professors cite him during ethics lectures. Political commentators reference his decision to turn state witness when discussing whistleblowers. Even corporate lawyers, in moments of philosophical musing, mention his name when debating loyalty versus morality. He's no longer just a former gangster. He's become a case study. In Palermo, high school history classes now briefly mention the Maxi trial alongside the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Red Brigades. One teacher, herself the daughter of a journalist who once reported from the courthouse steps, tells her students, "Buscetta didn't save us, but he forced us to stop pretending we didn't know." There's a museum now, small, tucked inside an old courthouse. Behind bulletproof glass sits one of the chairs from the trial. Visitors take photos. Children run past it without understanding. But the adults pause, some longer than others, and in the center of one display, a taped quote on the wall, attributed to Tommaso Buscetta. "Silence isn't always loyalty. Sometimes it's fear wearing manners." No picture accompanies the quote, just the words. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the U.S. federal system continues to refer to his cooperation as one of the most significant instances of international witness collaboration. His case sets the tone for future mafia infiltrations, cartel takedowns, even corporate fraud investigations. His name becomes shorthand for high-value intelligence delivered at high personal cost. And yet, very few know where he was buried. There's an anecdote, maybe true, maybe embellished, about a mid-level FBI analyst who tried to track down his final resting place out of curiosity. She sifted through layers of redacted documents, misfiled aliases, and conflicting death certificates. After 2 years, she gave up. But in her report's margin, she wrote, "He hid himself the same way he exposed everyone else, methodically." That line circulates in internal memos for a while. Eventually, someone prints it on a coffee mug. Many people still believe Buscetta's final wish was anonymity. Others argue he wanted to be remembered, but not recognized. There's a quiet theory that the more he faded from view, the more power his story gained. So what do you think? Does a man become immortal when no one can find his grave, but everyone repeats his name? His children go on to live lives of deliberate neutrality. One runs a bookstore in Oregon. Another teaches English in Australia. None of them change the world. None of them appear on talk shows. But each of them, in their own way, avoids sharp corners and open curtains. They inherit his instincts. They just redirect them. And the mafia? It persists, not as it once was, no more councils sealed with blood oaths, but in systems, in boardrooms, in shadows now hidden behind screens. The language changes, compliance, strategy, operational partnerships, but the structure? Still familiar, still recognizable to anyone who's read the old playbooks. There's a Sicilian barbershop that still operates in Palermo. New owners, fresh tile. But in the back, a chair remains untouched, slightly older, its leather worn in places. Locals say it belonged to the man who used to cut hair and collect whispers. Tourists ask who he was. The barber shrugs. Just someone who listened too well, and that's the version that survives. Not the Don, not the traitor, not the pentito, just the listener. The man who, in the end, understood the one truth too many others forgot. That silence can be louder than any bullet if you let it echo long enough. In Rome, an intern for a state prosecutor once joked, "You know you're winning when your enemies quote your testimony at their own trial." Her supervisor didn't laugh. He just said, "Buscetta taught us how to listen. The rest, we had to learn on our own." And far away, in a dusty town with no notoriety, someone walks past a mailbox that was once used to deliver legal updates under 3 different names. They don't know it, but they walk a little slower, as if something important passed through there once, and it did. The longer a man like Tommaso Buscetta stays gone, the more the world tries to make sense of him. But the closer people look, the harder he becomes to define. In true crime podcasts, he becomes a legend. The man who broke the mafia, they say, often over moody piano music and noir-style narration. One episode features an actor reading his quotes in a low whisper, trying to imitate that careful cadence, deliberate, unhurried, with the weight of too many funerals behind every word. But they always miss something, because what made Buscetta unforgettable wasn't the drama. It was the restraint. He didn't spill secrets like a man setting fire to his past. He poured them like a physician measuring medicine, controlled, knowing just how much would hurt without killing the patient. And in the end, Italy didn't die from what he said. It woke up. Even now, new trials and anti-mafia operations continue to cite his testimony, not just as evidence, but as context. His framework, the structure he described so precisely, helps law enforcement understand the newer models. as if he gave them the Rosetta Stone for organized crime. And long after his passing, the stone still translates. A law professor in Milan teaches an entire course called Structures of Power, from Cosa Nostra to corporate crime. Week 2 is simply titled Buscetta. The students, born after his death, read the transcripts like scripture. They marvel at how calmly he described the logic behind life and death decisions, the elegance of the horror. There's one quote in particular that's become oddly popular among students and legal scholars alike. You didn't need to love killing to be in the mafia. You just had to accept it as the cost of your silence. That line gets posted on law school corkboards and criminal justice forums. Most repost it without knowing who said it. Some assume it's from a film. But those who know. Meanwhile, in Palermo, a quiet movement grows among families of victims. They don't forgive Buscetta, but they no longer ignore him either. For some, he remains the traitor. For others, a tool of justice. And for a rare few, something stranger. A mirror. A reminder that even the deepest loyalties can rot. Christina's final belongings are donated to a local hospice by one of their daughters. Among the items, a box of cassettes, neatly labeled with courtroom dates. None are opened, none are played. The hospice accepts them without question, places them in a storage room beneath stacks of paperbacks and holiday decorations. One day, a volunteer finds them, listens to a few seconds of one and remarks, "Sounds like confession." That's close enough. In a separate corner of the world, a former prosecutor visits an international law conference. He's old now, hunched, gray. During a panel on transnational crime, someone asks about his most unforgettable case. The room expects him to say Riina, or Provenzano, or one of the faceless cartel lords who ruled with gold-plated guns and satellite phones. Instead, he says, "The most unforgettable one was the man who didn't run out of names," and the room goes quiet, because they all know who he means. Many people still say Buscetta was just the first domino, that someone else would have cracked the code eventually, that the system was too corrupt not to collapse. But others believe differently. They say he was the only one who could have explained it while it was still standing. So what do you believe? That systems fall under pressure, or that sometimes all it takes is one man to stop whispering? There's no plaque for Tommaso, no statue, no holiday. He has no square named after him, no scholarship fund, no best-selling memoir. His story lives in margins and testimony, in the small moments when a case is solved because of something he once murmured through a translator 3 decades earlier. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe that's the final act of a man who once traded noise for silence, then silence for truth. Because if you walk through Palermo at night, through the old quarters where the shutters still creak and the air smells like sea and stone, you might hear it. Not a voice, but a memory with its hands in its pockets, watching, waiting, not to be remembered, but to remind. Years stretch on like quiet hallways, and the name Buscetta continues its strange afterlife. Part warning, part legend, part unresolved whisper. In Italy, he is still spoken of, but rarely with the same temperature. The heat has gone out of his name. What's left is weight. A retired magistrate giving a talk at a university in Bologna pauses midway through his lecture and looks out at the rows of students. "We didn't win because of Buscetta," he says. "We just stopped losing." It lands like a proverb, and maybe it is. Somewhere in New Jersey, a former bodyguard, long since out of the game, tells stories in a bar. He talks about the witness protection days, about how meticulous the old man was, how he shaved at the same time every morning, how he never left a room without knowing where the exits were. He wasn't afraid, the bodyguard says, just rehearsed. Tommaso Buscetta wasn't waiting for the past to catch up. He was waiting to finish running from it. In Rome, a mid-level anti-corruption officer pins a yellowed map of old mafia territories on his office wall. Every so often, he traces a line from Palermo to Sao Paulo to New York with a pen cap, whispering to himself the trail that Buscetta once described with surgical precision. He didn't just expose them, the officer mutters. He taught us how they think. And yet, despite the clarity he brought, the darkness never vanishes completely. In some corners of Sicily, omertà still clings like mold in old stone. There are villages where people still lower their voices when certain surnames are spoken. A man's cousin is killed in a land dispute. A woman's shop is accidentally burned down after she files a zoning complaint. No one sees anything. No one ever does. But the difference now, there are people who do speak up. Slowly, reluctantly, carefully. And often, they do it because someone named Buscetta proved that it's possible to walk through hell and still speak afterward. There's a new wave of investigative journalists in Italy. Sharp, unflinching, unafraid. One of them, only 28, wears a pendant around her neck that says, "Non più silenzio," no more silence. In an interview, she's asked if it's about Buscetta. She smiles faintly and says, "It's about all of them. But yeah, he started the Echo." In Brazil, an old customs officer retires. Before he leaves, he donates a weathered leather notebook to a university archive. Inside, sketches of shipping routes, old pseudonyms, stamps from forged passports. One page is marked only with a name, Don Massino, a nickname once whispered between dock workers who didn't realize they were helping history move across oceans. Even in art, his shadow appears. A painter in Naples creates a series called Witnesses. One canvas shows only a silhouette behind a curtain, lit by the glow of a tape recorder. Another depicts a chessboard floating in dark water, pieces missing, but the game still in motion. In the exhibit brochure, the artist writes, "I've never met Buscetta, but I live in the house he helped make possible. Still, not everyone wants the myth preserved. There's a petition in Palermo to remove his name from a footnote in a school textbook. Too complicated, the critics say. Too gray. They want heroes or villains, preferably not both in one man, but others push back. A student writes an essay arguing that Buscetta should be studied not as a role model, but as a map. He isn't what we should become, she writes, but he shows us how power moves, how silence grows, and what it costs to interrupt either. And in that sense, he becomes a kind of curriculum. An older FBI agent, long retired, once called him the patron saint of bad men who did one good thing. Not quite reverent, not quite disdainful, just honest. So what do we do with a man like that? Do we file him under justice or survival? Do we say he repented or merely redirected? Or do we accept that sometimes the person who opens the door isn't the one we wanted, but exactly the one we needed? His grave remains unknown, but his story, still told, still unfolding, still walking the long, quiet corridors of history in soft shoes. Time passes the way fog does, imperceptibly, until you realize you can no longer see what's behind you. Tommaso Buscetta's life becomes that kind of memory for the world. Not gone, just softened at the edges. A figure moving further away through history's haze, still visible if you squint hard enough, still whispering if you lean in close. In Palermo, the courthouse where the Maxi trial once unfolded has been renovated. Brighter lighting, new security systems. The cages remain, though. Those iron compartments that once held the might of Cosa Nostra, now empty, like teeth pulled long after the pain. Tourists occasionally wander in, snapping photos with phones that carry more computing power than any police database from 1986. One of the docents, a middle-aged woman who used to be a law clerk, tells the story with practiced cadence. And this is where the testimony began, where the silence cracked. She says Buscetta's name softly, like it still echoes. And in a way, it does. His words, delivered decades ago, are still used in anti-mafia training sessions across Europe. Young officers, most born long after the bloodiest chapters ended, listen to his recorded statements in tiny classrooms with peeling paint. They hear the careful voice explain how decisions were voted on in the commission, how murders were ordered with nods, how trust was a currency spent faster than cash. And then one instructor always asks, "Would you have done what he did?" The room goes quiet, always does. Some say no, too dangerous. Others say yes, if it meant saving family. But a few don't answer. They just stare at the floor, maybe wondering what silence feels like when it's both shield and sword. Elsewhere, in São Paulo, a professor of international criminal law devotes an entire semester to case studies on transnational crime syndicates. One session, labeled simply the Buscetta Break, examines how his cooperation marked a tectonic shift in how governments tackle criminal networks. A slide goes up showing his known aliases, complete with forged Brazilian IDs. Students murmur in disbelief. Then the professor clicks forward, revealing how many of those IDs were linked to both legal and illegal businesses. He was not chaotic, she says. He was organized chaos. That's what made him powerful. That's what made him dangerous. And eventually, that's what made him useful. In the back of the class, a student whispers, "But he still killed people, right?" And another replies, "Yeah," and then made sure the people who taught him how got arrested. So what do you make of that? Is truth less truthful because it's delivered by someone with blood on their hands? Or is that the only kind of truth that knows where to aim? In media, Buscetta occasionally resurfaces as a supporting character in docudramas and prestige television, always played by actors with good cheekbones and distant eyes. But the performances never quite capture the stillness, the way he spoke like he was balancing glass on every syllable, the way his truths landed like dropped china. He once said, "The mafia survives because it adapts. It evolves faster than the law. The only thing that stops it is a man willing to be hated more than he fears being killed." That quote now sits etched in glass at a temporary exhibition in Geneva on organized crime and global justice. A child walks by and asks their mother, "Was he a good guy or a bad guy?" The mother hesitates. "He was both," she says. "But he told the truth when no one else would. That's as close as anyone ever gets." His children, now well into middle age, live quietly. No memoirs, no press, just birthdays, dinners. A few whispered memories passed on to grandchildren who may or may not understand. One of them once asked, "Was Nono a hero?" And the answer came slowly. "He was a man who stopped lying. That was his best moment." Some nights Palermo still remembers. The old men who sit outside cafes at dusk, playing cards and speaking with their hands, pause when they hear certain names, not out of fear anymore, but out of ritual. A nod to the ghosts, and every now and then someone raises a glass, not in toast, but in silence, to the man who listened before anyone spoke, to the man who spoke when no one else dared, to the man who walked into the mouth of history with both hands open. There's a saying in Sicily, "I morti non parlano, ma I vivi dimenticano." The dead don't speak, but the living forget. And yet, Tommaso Buscetta refuses to be forgotten, not through force, not through fame, but through the sheer persistence of relevance. Decades after his death, his voice, recorded, transcribed, translated, still infiltrates rooms he never entered, classrooms he never imagined, strategies he never lived to see. In Interpol's seminars on global crime syndicates, Buscetta's case is presented not as a moment, but as a model. His cooperation is taught alongside digital surveillance techniques, cartel structure breakdowns, and modern racketeering law. A photo of his face, eyes shadowed, expression unreadable, is projected onto screens the size of movie theater walls. The instructor calls him the man who diagrammed the beast from the inside, and students nod. Some take notes. One whispers, "He didn't just defect. He explained the algorithm." Meanwhile, in a small library in Turin, a retired journalist catalogs old interview tapes. One of them, labeled B, Unused Cuts, contains 6 minutes of Buscetta talking about love. Not the romantic kind, the kind that's too dangerous to speak of in his former world. "I loved my sons," he says softly. "I tried to protect them by staying silent. Then I tried to protect their memory by speaking." The tape cuts off abruptly. The journalist plays it again and again, then files it under history, conflicted figures. Christina's ashes were scattered at sea, quietly. No ceremony, no press. The children gathered, said few words, and watched the tide carry her into the horizon. One of them whispered, "She carried him longer than the Mafia ever did." Back in Palermo, local schools mark the anniversary of the Maxi trial verdict each year with a short remembrance. Some teachers skip it, too exhausted by politics to relive old ghosts. But a few insist. One class writes letters to the past, addressed to men and women who spoke up when it wasn't safe. One student, age 16, writes, "Dear Signor Buscetta, I don't know if you were brave or just broken, but you helped make my city a little less afraid. I think that counts for something." The letter is read aloud during a class visit to the courthouse steps. No applause, just a long pause. Many people still debate how Buscetta should be remembered, but fewer debate that he should be. His testimony, whether they admit it or not, cracked the ceiling of the Mafia's invincibility. It revealed that behind every fearsome organization lies a system of men pretending not to be scared of each other. And one man, one broken, grieving man, called their bluff. There's a single rose left on the courthouse steps every year. No note, no card, just the flower, laid early in the morning, always before anyone arrives. Some say it's one of his surviving grandchildren. Others think it's a gesture from someone who once owed him their life and still walks free because of it. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the city itself remembering what it cost to speak. In New York, a retired agent writes an unpublished memoir. The working title, The Whisper That Shook Palermo. The book never hit shelves, but the manuscript circulates quietly among law students, professors, and field officers. Its last sentence reads, "We didn't protect Buscetta because he was good. We protected him because he was useful. And by the end, he was more useful than anyone else had dared to be." So what do you believe? That a man like Buscetta earns redemption through confession? Or that confession is just another kind of survival? Maybe it doesn't matter, because sometimes the most valuable thing a man can do is break a silence so powerful it once held a country hostage, and then live long enough to hear it echo back. It's strange how memory becomes a kind of inheritance, passed on, unchosen, stitched into conversations where names aren't spoken aloud, but everyone knows who they're talking about. That's what Tommaso Buscetta becomes, in the end. A memory that behaves like a secret. Respected, resented, never fully unpacked. In Palermo, a graffiti artist stencils his silhouette onto a peeling wall near the old docks. Not the man in a suit, not the aged pentito, just a figure in a long coat walking away. Underneath the words, L'omertà finisce con chi parla. Omertà ends with the one who speaks. It's painted over 2 days later, but someone takes a photo before it vanishes. It ends up online, then on shirts, then in a gallery exhibit about modern resistance movements. A quiet revolution, sparked by someone who never called himself revolutionary. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in a small government office, an archivist uncovers a forgotten envelope tucked behind sealed deposition materials. It contains a single sheet of paper, handwritten, dated 1988. The ink has faded, but the message is still legible. Truth is a kind of violence, but at least it kills slower than silence. No signature, just the watermark of a federal evidence tag. The archivist files it under miscellaneous informant notes. Still it lingers. And back in Italy, the mafia does what it has always done. Adjusts, shapeshifts, becomes less visible, more digital. The threats now wear tailored suits, speak at corporate summits, donate to charities. But the same undercurrents flow. Fear, loyalty, silence. Only now that silence is a little thinner, because somewhere beneath the foundations of the system, a man once said, "Here's how it all works." And even decades later, people are still tracing those blueprints, still finding corners he exposed, still realizing how wide the shadows had stretched before someone brought a match. A filmmaker in Rome begins pre-production on a biopic. Not flashy, not stylized, just a quiet story about a man remembering too much. She wants to focus on the domestic life, on the nights in hiding, the dinners interrupted by nightmares, the small tendernesses that were almost entirely swallowed by history. In an interview, she says, "I'm not interested in the mafia. I'm interested in what it takes to unlearn your whole life." That line makes it to the trailer. Back in America, one of Buscetta's grandsons, now in his 40s, lives a quiet life, teaches high school civics. His students know nothing about his lineage. He never brings it up. But when they discuss whistleblowers or moral gray zones, he listens just a little more carefully. And sometimes, when they ask why some people risk everything to tell the truth, he says, "Because sometimes surviving is the only way to make your enemies hear you." He doesn't elaborate, and they don't ask. Meanwhile, in a university library, a researcher compiling a database of landmark testimonies tags Buscetta's under multiple categories: criminal justice, government reform, social deviance, legacy. She pauses before clicking save, then adds one more: human cost. Many people still think Buscetta's story ended when he died under that false name in an undisclosed location. But anyone paying attention knows better. His story didn't end. It unfolded across decades, across borders, across silence. And it still is, because every time someone asks what loyalty is worth, or what silence buys, or how systems break, his name waits quietly in the background, a witness not just to crime, but to what happens when a man finally decides to speak, not for glory, not for redemption, but simply because the lie had grown too large to carry. By the time the 21st century rounds its second corner, Tommaso Buscetta has been dead for over a decade, but in many ways, he's more present than ever. Not in headlines, not in films, but in the structure, the very scaffolding of how justice is now pursued when the enemy wears no uniform and answers to no flag. In Geneva, at an international conference on organized crime, his name is invoked not once, but 17 times in one session. One panelist describes his testimony as a Rosetta Stone of criminal governance. Another calls him the godfather of transparency. And someone in the audience, a young intelligence analyst from Nairobi, scribbles in her notebook, "Truth doesn't always come in clean hands. Sometimes it comes in bloodied gloves." She'll repeat that in her own lecture years later. The room will go quiet. Back in Sicily, the children of those once caught in the crossfire of mafia wars have grown up. Some left, some stayed. A few became lawyers. One opened a bakery, and one, a wiry, intense man named Luca, became a magistrate. When asked why he chose that life, he shrugs and says, "Because someone has to keep listening after the shouting stops." He keeps a copy of Buscetta's original deposition in a locked drawer, not out of admiration, but as a reminder. This is what it costs to tell the truth, and this is what happens when you wait too long to do it. The mafia still exists. Of course it does. It always will. But it's quieter now. Not because it grew less ambitious, but because the world learned how to hear it breathing. And part of that hearing, part of that global tuning in, started with a man who chose to speak long after his own voice had grown hoarse from staying quiet. An Italian novelist writes a thin book, fiction, barely veiled. The main character is a former gangster living in exile, feeding stray cats and mailing cryptic letters to unnamed prosecutors. The final scene is just the man standing alone in a field, listening to wind pass through grass. When asked in an interview if the character is Buscetta, the author replies, "No, but he's haunted by the same ghosts." That same month, a film festival in Portugal hosts a panel on memory and moral ambiguity. One speaker shows a single photo. Buscetta seated at a table, eyes shadowed, tie loosened, cigarette balanced on 2 fingers, as if mid-thought. The speaker says, "This man didn't save the world. He just slowed the bleeding." The audience doesn't applaud. They just nod. Back in the States, one of his great-grandchildren finds a trunk in storage. Inside, old newspaper clippings, a photo album, a worn leather glove, and a cassette tape with the label faded beyond recognition. She holds it up to the light, not knowing what it is. Not knowing it contains a voice that once helped dismantle an empire, she keeps the glove, leaves the tape. No one listens to it. But somehow that doesn't matter, because the echo still lives elsewhere, in the DNA of courtrooms, in the muscle memory of prosecutors, in the nervousness of men who once thought they were untouchable, in the way judges pause before pronouncing sentences when they know the chain of evidence started with a man whose sons died for his silence, and whose enemies died because he broke it. So what's left of Tommaso Buscetta? A name in a sealed file, a face blurred in archives, a legacy no one can wear without also wearing the cost. But more than that, what's left is the space he carved. The space between silence and survival. The space between loyalty and loss. The space that proves one voice, however imperfect, can still redraw the entire map. Many people still ask whether Buscetta was a good man. They want clarity, clean endings, morality wrapped in quotes. But history doesn't offer that here. All it offers is this: a man who chose to tell the truth after it was too late to save himself, but just in time to change everything else. In the end, Tommaso Buscetta's story doesn't fold into a neat conclusion. It dissolves. Like fog lifting over the Mediterranean, it leaves behind shapes that were always there, now just more visible. The man is gone, but the world he exposed cannot unsee itself. There's a park in a town that once hosted one of his safe houses. Unmarked, ordinary, the kind of place where toddlers chase pigeons and old men argue about soccer. But sometimes, in the late afternoon, a woman sits on a bench there with a notebook. No phone, just quiet. She writes fragments about justice, about cost, about names that don't belong in books but keep showing up in dreams. No one knows she's Buscetta's granddaughter, and she doesn't correct them. Across the Atlantic, a former Sicilian hitman, now turned state witness, sits in a federal holding facility. He's older, half forgotten by the world, but he still remembers the trial where Buscetta first testified. "I didn't believe it," he tells his court-appointed therapist. "I thought it was a trick. Then I watched him keep talking, and I knew. We'd lost. That admission won't go in any report, but it will echo. In law schools, students study pentateuch not as legends, but as levers, tipping points in systems once thought unshakable. A debate sparks. Can betrayal ever be moral? One student says no. Another argues yes. But the one in the back says, only if it teaches others how the game was played. No one disagrees. In a dusty archive in Rome, someone finally digitizes all of Buscetta's depositions. The files are uploaded quietly, without fanfare, into a government database labeled Witness Archive, Strategic Assets. No press release, no headline. But the data lives now, accessible, searchable, waiting. Somewhere in Sicily, a street has been renamed. Not after him, but after Falcone. And that feels right. Buscetta didn't want monuments. He wanted the machine to stop grinding people into dust. And maybe, just maybe, that machine now rattles more than it runs. Because of him. Because of what he gave up. Because of what he said when everyone else still clung to the lie. So what do we do with his legacy? Do we remember him with gratitude? Do we judge him for what he did before he spoke? Do we keep his story behind glass, or do we keep it close like a quiet warning? Maybe the better question is, do we listen when someone like him decides to talk? Because in the end, Tommaso Buscetta didn't ask to be believed. He just asked to be heard. And decades later, his voice still lingers. Half confession, half indictment, always undeniable. No sainthood, no absolution. Just a man who once wore silence like armor, and then set it down. One final act, one final sound. And now, listener, you've made it. You've walked the full length of the quiet betrayal. You've sat with the truths no one wanted to hear, and the weight of things no man was supposed to survive. You're still here, and so is he. Somewhere in the margins, somewhere in the hush between verdicts, still watching the world he tried to unmake. Sleep now. Let it drift. Let the silence hold you without fear. You're not alone anymore. This story is done, and so are the ghosts. And now let the pace slow. The story has settled. The echoes have dimmed, and the names that once held power dissolve softly into memory. You've just followed the quiet unraveling of a man who stood between two worlds, one ruled by silence, the other shaped by confession. Tommaso Buscetta's journey wasn't made of grand speeches or final justice. It was made of hesitation, heartbreak, and moments where choosing to speak meant losing everything else. But somewhere in that unraveling, somewhere in that slow betrayal of the life he once vowed to protect, he handed the world a rare thing: clarity. Now, let the details drift away. The courtrooms, the names, the streets that once ran red with fear. Let them fade like fog lifting in the early morning, leaving only stillness behind. A soft, warm stillness. No shadows creeping under doorways. No old debts knocking for payment. Just the kind of hush that asks for nothing. If your mind starts to wander, let it. If your breath slows, welcome it. This is the space where old stories sleep and new ones wait patiently. You're safe here, and the ghosts, they've made their peace. Whatever tomorrow brings, it arrives gently, without sirens, without secrets, just the quiet confidence of someone who's seen the storm and lived to whisper about it. So ease deeper now, into the kind of rest that doesn't need permission. You've heard the story. You've carried the weight. Now let it go and sleep.